What do you do when the clocks crawl past midnight and the building itself seems to breathe? When the corridors you walk every night feel slightly misaligned, as if they remember someone else's footsteps better than yours? Tonight, 3 true-style accounts from people who worked when the world slept and met something that wasn't tea on the schedule. If you've ever taken a night shift, you know the silence isn't empty, it watches. Story 1. The hospital basement story setup. Clara had handled nights before urgent care, recovery, even the psych wing on slow weekends, but she always managed to trade out of the basement rotation. Officially, those floors were for storage, decommissioned equipment, file archives, and a laundry room that had been sealed since a boiler incident in the 1980s. Unofficially, everyone called it the cold level, not because of the temperature, but because you came back from rounds down there feeling like you'd left body heat behind, and something else had claimed it. On a Tuesday that had dragged itself into Wednesday, the charge nurse tapped Clara's screen and reassigned her. Short on coverage, she said. 1 sweep each hour. Keys, radio, flashlight. Sign the log at every checkpoint. You'll be fine. Clara nodded because she was tired and because night workers become experts at swallowing the word no. She clipped the ring of tagged brass keys to her belt, tested the radio, and checked the flashlight battery, full beam sharp. A laminated map on the wall showed the checkpoints, 6 of them: supply, records, utility, mechanical, laundry, exit stairwell. She glanced at the logbook chained to a small shelf under the map. The last entry was from 11:05 p.m., signed by A. Patel. A tidy time, a neat signature, someone who did not linger. Clara clicked her pen. 12:03 a.m. she signed. Suspense build up. The first oddity was ordinary, running water. It sounded like someone had turned on a tap and left it. She followed the echo past the records room. Rows of cardboard boxes labeled with years that belonged to other people's lives, until she reached the utility closet. The sink was ancient porcelain with iron handles so calcified they looked fossilized. Water flowed, clear and fast. She set the flashlight on its base and gripped the handles. They didn't move a millimeter. The water, however, stopped. She didn't write that down. She didn't radio. She told herself she was tired enough to misremember the sound of a busted drain. Checkpoint 2 records was cool enough that her breath smoked faintly. She ran her light across the sign-out ledger shelves. In the beam, filaments of dust hung unbroken in the air like fine cobwebs of time. No footprints, no smudges on the handles. She signed the wall log. 12:11 a.m. A wheel squeaked. It was unmistakable, the slow roll of a gurney wheel that needed oil. She clicked off the flashlight and stood still. In the dark, the sound sharpened, as if happy to be heard. SQU eek, pause, SQU eek, drawn out like a breath held too long. It seemed to come from the mechanical corridor around the bend. Security, she tried, radio halfway to her mouth, but she didn't press the button. Something in the sound asked not to be reported, only witnessed. She turned the corner. The mechanical corridor led to the big metal doors that guarded the boiler room. A chain crossed the handles, padlocked and tagged with a brittle paper sign. Do not enter. Hello, she said, because saying hello is what you do in hospitals. Even the dead deserve a greeting. A draft slid along the corridor, cold, deliberate. It carried a smell she recognized from childhood. Steam heat and starch. Laundry. She signed at checkpoint 3 mechanical with a hand that wasn't shaking yet. 12:19 a.m. Checkpoint 4 was the laundry room, though the door had been sealed for decades, or so she'd heard. The hallway narrowed toward a set of double doors with wired glass panels the color of old tea. Beneath a "Do Not Use" placard, someone had taped a printed notice about renovations that never came. Facilities review pending. The bulb above the door didn't work. Clara raised her light to peer through the wired glass. On the other side, pale shapes loomed: carts, linen bags stacked like human-sized cocoons. A steel table with a dented corner where someone had once dropped a drum of detergent. She'd seen similar setups upstairs, alive with motion. Down here it was a photograph taken without people. Until the photograph changed. One of the linen bags shifted. Not a trick of breath, not a sinking stack, a clear, gentle topple, as if something inside had rolled over. Clara stepped back so quickly the light skittered across the window and made a white lash across the wire. She aimed the beam again, slower. The bag lay still now, half collapsed, a pale mound on the floor. Her radio popped, static only like sand on tin. Copy, she tried, thumb on the button. Basement sweep in progress. Opie, the radio said back, but not in the voice she expected. The syllable came filtered and thin, as if spoken from another room at the end of a long hallway. She released the button so hard her nail hurt. She signed, 12:27 a.m. On the way to the exit stairwell, she passed a bulletin board clotted with safety posters. One showed a cartoon hand lifting a box the wrong way. Another asked, "Did you wash?" in cheerful letters beside a faucet sketch. A third was older, sun-bleached behind newer announcements. Shift Memorial. Read the headline, and beneath it a list of initials and dates. Clara's light moved on without focusing. She clicked her pen at the staircase log, 12:31 a.m. On her way back to the elevator, she passed the map shelf to make sure she hadn't invented B2. She hadn't. It wasn't there. Next round, 1 a.m., she drank tepid coffee, scrolled the message from a friend that said survive, and forced herself to laugh. Climax, scary moment. At 1:03 a.m., she signed again and turned down the records corridor. The temperature had dropped. Her flashlight, steady moments ago, developed a small tremor in her hand. She told herself to stop it. She told her body not to listen to her brain. She reached the utility closet first, because she wanted to prove to herself that nothing was wrong. The sink was dry. The iron handles still refused to move. She exhaled and caught a glimpse of herself in the chrome paper towel dispenser. Pale hair escaping from a bun, eyes a little wide. Behind her reflection stood another shape, white coat, head bowed, hands clasped. She turned so fast the flashlight thunked into the doorframe. The small closet was empty. The dispenser gave her back only herself, and the faint elongation of the room that convex metal always makes. She closed the door slowly and spoke aloud, because sometimes a sheet of words over your fear is the only blanket you get. Okay, you're fine, stop it. She continued to the records room. The door stood half open, though she remembered shutting it. A little wedge of air slipped through the gap, cold and dry, the flavor of paper. She pushed it open with the edge of the flashlight. Boxes to the ceiling. A rolling ladder that belonged in a library. On the central table, the sign-out ledger had been opened to a page that glittered slightly with fresh ink. Clara stepped closer. The names were columns of careful handwriting. People who had checked out files for audits, long ended, for patients, long buried. At the bottom of the page, a new entry, line crisp, black. B1. Linen loss report. The signature under it was a looped capital D and a last name she didn't want to sound out. The date was tonight, 1:05. "Who's here?" she asked, softer than she meant to. Her voice fell into the room and didn't come back. The wheel squeak returned, right behind her ear. She spun and saw only the ladder, but the sound continued, rolling past her toward the hall, as if an invisible gurney had brushed by. The door to the mechanical corridor opened on its own. Not slammed, not flung open with courtesy. Clara's feet moved even while her mind filled with alternative plans. She stopped at the chained boiler doors. The padlock was in place, the chain taut. The air beyond the crack between the doors was colder than the hallway. Her radio clicked and whistled. A voice pushed up through static, like a diver out of dark water. "Stay with me." 3 words, the kind sick people say when the meds run short and panic finds a foothold. Clara pressed the transmit button with shaking fingers. "Who is this?" She hated that she sounded like movie dialogue. "Identify yourself." The reply was not a voice. It was a long exhale into the microphone, close and slow, as if the speaker's mouth were almost touching the grill. Then the line went clean. She forced herself to continue. "Laundry next." The wired glass showed the same shapes as before, except the cart nearest the door had drifted 6 inches sideways, leaving a smooth, curved track in the dust, as if it had pivoted to let someone by. Clara placed her palm on the glass. It felt warmer than the air. She didn't know what she was waiting for until it happened. The slight pressure of another palm pressing back from the far side. Not a slam, a gentle match. Then it was gone. Something moved beyond the car, just the suggestion of a white shoulder, the fold of a sleeve, like turning pages seen through rippled glass. Clara's mouth went dry enough to taste dust. "Do you need help?" she asked the door. She made her voice professional, the way you talk when a family member asks, "Is there pain?" The light above the laundry door flickered, blinked twice, and steadied. The printed renovation notice lifted a corner and settled. Down the hall, the exit stairwell door blew open with a breath of air, though Clara felt no draft. She walked toward it, because that is what a sweep does, because the map said to, because leaving would be a violation her body would not let her commit. The stairwell yawned gray. The sign that read to B2 had not been there before. The arrow pointed down. Clara took the first step, then the second. Her flashlight beam stepped with her, longer and longer shadows. The air smelt of iron and starch again. At the first landing, she heard the squeak of the wheel for the last time. Very close, almost companionable, and a whisper so soft she could have invented it. Laundry. She reached the B2 door. There was no lock. The lettered stencil on the paint had mostly flaked away, but the ghost of the word sorting remained. Clara pressed. Inside lay a room with gravity in it. Even the flashlight beam felt heavier. Bins lined one wall like open mouths. Chutes yawned in the ceiling, square and black as unplugged windows. In the center, a table with steel legs. On it, a ledger like the one upstairs, but older. The lines faint. The first page had been dated decades ago. The last page was tonight. The column headers read, "Item count, missing," in a careful, neat hand that belonged to someone who prided themselves on never making an error. A single line had been entered. Sheets 361. Clara's throat tightened. She knew what the missing one meant. Not linen, body. The radio crackled. She raised it to her mouth like a talisman. Before she could speak, the same thin voice, closer now, tired, patience, said, "Found." A cart bumped the table gently, as if to draw attention. A moment later, cloth slid from one of the bins to the floor with the slow, heavy grace of something soaked. The pale shape lay there, for a second too long, like the outline of a person under a sheet. Clara closed her eyes. "Okay," she said, to the room, to the radio, to the ledger, to whatever had counted faithfully for years without relief. "Okay, I'm here." She folded the sheet. She lifted it onto the table. Her hands remembered motions she had watched in laundry rooms, her whole career: square edges, strong corners, a final flattening palm. When she was done, the air lightened half a degree, like someone in a long coma had managed a shallow, satisfied breath. When she turned to leave, the B to sign on the stairwell side of the door had flaked another layer, making the 2 look like a 1. On the way up, the squeak was gone. She signed the log at the map shelf with a steadier line than she deserved. 1:31 a.m. resolution. At 2 a.m., she asked the charge nurse for relief. She didn't mention B2. She did ask, casually, "Does the hospital keep old incident names on record?" The charge nurse doesn't look up. "Which one?" "The laundry, the boiler, somebody with a D name." "Dr. Devon," the nurse said, tapping at her keyboard. "Fire in 87. He tried to clear the laundry room and got trapped by steam. He kept counting, they say. Staff used to hear him at night, checking rounds." Later that morning, when light made everything stupid again, Clara went back alone, without the keys or the log. With a single lily from the flower cart, she slid the stem through the gap at the wired glass and let it fall inside. The flower disappeared with the weightless tumble of a note passed between classes. Behind the glass, something shifted politely to make space. Clara didn't request a different assignment. She still disliked the cold level. But when the new hires came back up with that hollow look and said the word squeak, she would tell them 2 things: sign the logs, and when someone downstairs asks you to stay long enough to say, "I see you." It helps more than you think. Story 2. The Highway 17 graveyard shift story setup between the town and the border. Highway 17 cuts a dark ribbon through low desert, where scrub brushes hunch like old men and wind turns signs into instruments. At mile marker 63, a gas station sits under a buzzing canopy of fluorescent light. It's not a franchise, just a rectangle with glass doors, 1 aisle of chips, a humming cooler full of sodas, and a whiteboard that reads, "Coffee, 99. Lucky if fresh." Jason took the job because night shifts paid an extra $2 an hour, and because he liked the quiet. He could stock the shelves, listen to late-night radio hosts who told stories more than they told news, and watch the occasional 18-wheeler glide in like a slow blue whale. 4 nights out of 5, it felt like being the last human awake. On a Tuesday, at 2:58 a.m., he looked up from counting the register and saw a sedan parked at pump 3. He hadn't heard it arrive. He hadn't heard tires on gravel or the pump motion sensor chirp. The car was there, the way a word appears on a screen, suddenly, as if it had always belonged. It wasn't new or old. It was the absence of both: paint the color of rain at dusk, windows that reflected light but showed no interior detail. The pump's digital display read 0.00. The driver's door remained closed. Jason waited a minute, watching through glass that caught his reflection in faint silhouettes. When nobody came in, he slid the countertop lock, pushed open the door, and called, "You good out there?" No answer. The canopy lights thrummed the way power lines thrum when the air is wet. He walked to the pump. The handle wasn't in the car, but the display had changed. 1.11 gallons. Jason looked directly at the nozzle. It hung on its cradle. He looked at the car's fuel door, closed. "Okay," he said, "because sometimes you say okay to the air to convince it you're in charge." He scanned the lot. Highway empty in both directions. Fence line ticked with posts like tines on a comb. Sky strong with stars that always look closer in the desert. He turned back, and the pump read 3.07 gallons. He had not heard it click, not smelled gas, not felt a whisper of movement. He reached out and touched the pump. It was warm. Not with desert day heat, but with a soft, internal warmth, like a plugged-in toaster. He looked at the car's window and saw himself 20-something. Thin hat crooked flected between the sodium light rails. Something else hovered just over his shoulder in the glass. The curve of a profile, like a person turned away, thinking. When he spun, the lot was empty, except for the sedan. He went back inside to check the interior cameras, more to prove he wasn't alone with his head than to catch anyone. The monitors showed 5 angles: door, aisle, counter, cooler, lot. In the lot feed, pump 3 stood vacant. No car, no night insects smearing the lens. Nothing but shimmering heat his brain insisted on seeing, even though it was chilly. Jason toggled to the transaction system. The register had printed a receipt. He hadn't authorized it. He hadn't heard the dot matrix whine. He tore the paper and read, PUMP $3.11.11. "Thank you, Jason." He put the slip down. He picked it up. He read his name again to see if it could be something else. The door chime dinged. He looked up, expecting dust, wind, a moth fat enough to trigger the sensor. The entryway was clear. He walked around the counter slowly, stopped at the threshold, and stood where the beam should have cut his shin. Silence. Then, just as he was about to reach for the sensor with one finger, the chime dinged again, twice, polite and quick, like a person passing and nodding. He slept badly after his shift, and came back the next night anyway. Night workers do. Suspense built up for 3 nights. Nothing happened. Jason told himself the receipt had been a glitch, and the car had belonged to a customer who had coasted in and coasted out, while he was staring at the count drawer. The mind loves plausible deniability. On the 4th night, Friday, when the desert fills with distant music, and the highway carries more laughter than usual, he was restocking jerky when the canopy lights, which sometimes flickered and sometimes swarmed flies, went perfectly still and bright. That stillness is its own noise. It made him look up. The sedan waited at pump 3. This time, he didn't go outside immediately. He stood at the counter and stared, and when he realized he hadn't blinked, he let his eyes burn and blinked hard. The car remained. The pump display remained 0. He took a breath, walked out, and stopped 10 feet away. The driver's window reflected him again, and behind him closer, now the suggestion of another figure. He locked his knees to keep from taking a step back and raised a hand in a half-wave. "Need anything?" he asked. The word need felt funny. Flat, like chalk. He looked at his hand. It shook, but not uncontrollably. Something about that made it worse. He checked the hose again. It still hung. The numbers kept climbing. He wanted to take a photograph and couldn't make himself move enough to retrieve his phone. A gust of wind climbed over the fence and scooped gravel across the lot. The sound was like a shrug. When he looked back, the car was gone. The pump clicked. The hose twitched as if a phantom had replaced it. On the counter printer, paper started advancing. Jason jogged inside, warning himself not to run, and read the new slip. Pump $3 10.00 long drive tonight. He set it next to the first. He didn't tell anyone. You don't, at first. You assume the event belongs to you until it proves it doesn't. The next week, Tuesday again. The chime rang while he was in the cooler, arranging bottles so their labels faced out. He came out to an empty store and a third slip waiting on the glass. Pump $3 7.77. Don't lock the door. He locked the door. At 3:11 a.m., someone knocked, not on the glass, on the metal frame. 3 slow raps. It sounded like a person who has patience. He waited in place behind the counter and pretended to count coins. The knocking didn't repeat. He unlocked the door only when the eastern sky began to gray, and the garbage truck on the far side of the highway made human noise again. Climax, scary moment. The last night he worked there, the radio went out. Not the one on the counter that played talk shows. The corporate radio in the back that let him call other stations if something went wrong. He fiddled with the dial and heard only sand. When he stepped out to the store again, the sedan was parked directly in front of the doors, uncomfortably close, grill like a mouth that had decided on a conversation. Jason froze, maybe for a full minute. The pump displays were blank. The canopy lights hummed high and fine. He could see his face in the windshield glass now, and when he leaned, he thought just for a second he could see through the reflection into the cabin. There were no seats, no wheel, no dash, no interior. The darkness inside the car was not the absence of light. It was a presence, velvet thick, like the backstage of a theater between scenes. The printer began to spit paper, tearing and spitting, tearing and spitting. Receipt after receipt, the little motor whining with the strain. He grabbed the first one that fell free. Pump $30. See you tomorrow. Jason. The door chime rang without the door moving. Then the lights in the store browned for a second, the way light does ahead of a storm. The cooler hummed lower. Jason felt pressure in his sinuses, as if the weather had changed very rapidly. He broke. He walked to the door, bent, and slid the latch that kept the door locked at night. The moment he released it, the chime rang. A breeze touched his shirt. From behind him, he heard a single footstep on tile, then another, slow and careful, as if a person were keeping their weight close to the ground. He did not turn around. He could not have moved if he tried. The footfalls crossed the store, went past him by inches, and stopped at the counter. He heard the receipt printer rip one last time. The footfalls returned, a whisper of weight, and the air in front of him moved as if a cold shoulder had just brushed his arm. Then nothing. Silence. The humming canopy. The sigh of road. Jason closed the door gently. He went to the counter and picked up the final slip. Pump $3 13.13. Thank you. His own handwriting had signed under the total. He had not held a pen. Resolution. He turned in his notice the next morning without being able to explain why he couldn't T-swap to day shift. The manager, who'd seen too many kids spin out their nerves between midnight and dawn, shrugged and said, "You do you." Months later, Jason drove Highway 17 with friends in daylight. They laughed past mile marker 63. He didn't point. He didn't want to look. At the next town, he stopped for gas at a chain with clean restrooms and apple-flavored air freshener. When he pulled the nozzle from his car, the pump display glitched briefly and showed 11.11 gallons, even though he hadn't yet pressed the trigger. He shook his head and sighed. The way you do when a thing you survived wants to wave at you from the other side of the street. He folded a receipt into his wallet without checking to see if it knew his name. Story 3. The hotel front desk story setup. Anita liked the night shift. She said it the way people who prefer winter say they like the air sharper. As a front desk clerk in a downtown hotel with pre-war bones and post-war plumbing, she appreciated the hours after midnight because the lobby belonged to her and the building behaved. No wedding parties, no soccer teams, no convention attendees asking for water at 2 in the afternoon. Just a handful of business travelers arriving on delayed flights and the soft parade of insomniacs walking carpet circuits like penitents. The hotel kept its history discreet. Framed photos of the lobby from the 1920s heavy staircase balustrades that had been refinished. So many times the wood grain looked like a fingerprint, and a brass mail slot no one had used in 30 years, but which received on average 2 postcards a year, as if some tourist guide somewhere still recommended it. 2 rumors traveled the staff circuits. 1. Room 1207 had been sealed after a guest died in a manner the building couldn't forget. 2. The lobby payphone rang on nights when fog lay down along the river and the city lights went fuzzy. Everyone laughed about the phone. It had no line. The cord didn't even go into the wall anymore. They laughed until it rang. On the last Tuesday in October, heavy air sat against the tall lobby windows. Anita leaned on the back office desk to stretch and watched the clock. Walk toward 2 a.m. She was halfway through a tray of keycards that needed reprogramming when the payphone black, heavy, perfectly decorative rang twice, then once more, sharp, like a cough. She looked up at the security camera monitors. The view that showed the phone also showed nothing near it. She waited. The phone rang again. The sound was not nostalgic. It was rude and present, like a thrown penny. Anita walked out into the lobby and stood in front of it. The receiver was cool under her hand, cooler than room temperature. "This is the front desk," she said, and flushed with the ridiculousness of speaking to a dead line. "Check them in," a voice said. A woman's voice. Not old, not young, clear, calm. The kind that could read instructions while the building burned and make you listen. "Who?" Anita asked automatically because she could not think of a more meaningful question. Silence. The dial tone did not return because there had never been one. She hung up. The payphone did not ring again. The lobby doors, heavy, automatic, reliable and locked, and slid open with a sigh that sounded like relief. No one came in, but across the marble wet footprints appeared in a line, not muddy, not messy, just damp ovals that tasted faintly of river when she leaned to smell. They approached the front desk. They stopped exactly where a guest would stop to sign the registration card. The guest book, which the manager kept as a quaint tradition for the pleasure of certain customers, opened. The fountain pen beside it lifted and wrote without a hand. The letters were careful and old-fashioned. They did not blot or wobble. Then the pen lowered, the book shut, and the footprints began again, as if the guest had turned. The elevator dinged, the doors opened. The car waited and waited without complaining. Anita did not move for longer than she would admit. Then she stepped around the desk and read the page the book had opened to. Room 1207. No name this time, just the number, written like a destination you should already know the way to. Suspense build-up. Security footage showed nothing. Anita replayed the camera angle that covered the doors, the lobby, the desk. No opening, no footprints, no book. The payphone had not twitched, the elevator had not moved. She stood alone with the evidence only she could see, and the strange, persistent feeling that someone expected her to continue a process, not start one. She took the brass key that hung on the hook, marked 1207, not a card. The old rooms still had old locks and set it on the desk. It felt heavier than its twin keys, warm, as if someone had been holding it. At 2:17 a.m., the phone in the back office rang. The display read, "Boiler Room." Anita stared, because the boiler room had no phone. The engineer had a cell, a radio, and a whistle he blew when he was being dramatic. She picked up slowly. "Front desk," she said, trying to sound like someone who had been trained for this. The same calm voice from the payphone spoke as if they had been mid-call, and Anita had forgotten. "Late arrival. Please prepare the room." Anita swallowed. "Which room?" A pause, then gently, as if meeting a tired child where they were. 12th floor, 7th. The line clicked. She stepped into the elevator with the key in her pocket, because doing so felt worse than staying and better than pretending nothing had happened. The car lurched. Older elevators do that when they're being honest. She watched the numbers climb, felt her ears change pressure, and thought about all the people who had ridden in this small room before her. Brides hiding touch-up lipstick, bellhops with cart-shined shoes, men with ties loosened the way, stories loosen a person. At 12, the doors opened on a corridor, softer than the lower floors. The carpet had recently been replaced blue, with a faint gold pattern that pretended to stars. Every door was closed. The air smelled like citrus cleaner and sleep. At the far end, the plaque 1207 caught the low light and returned it politely. Anita listened. Not for voices or the television bleed that sometimes slips past door frames at 2 a.m., but for any pressure air moving where it shouldn't. Electricity muttering to itself. Human attention focusing where you aren't. She stepped toward 1207 and took the key from her pocket. The key slid easily. Old locks either fight or welcome, and this one welcomed. The door opened 2 inches. Cold air spilled over her wrist with the textured feeling of air that hasn't had lungs in it for a long time. "Housekeeping," Anita said, without meaning to, because the word felt safer than hello. No answer. She opened the door all the way. Climax, scary moment. The room had been restored for a brochure white duvet, too many pillows, a chair angled to the window, curtains held by meek tiebacks. Everything aligned, everything correct. On the desk sat a black telephone, like the lobby's older cousin. The handset lay off the cradle, as if someone had just listened and put it down when they were done. Anita set the key on the dresser, like an offering, and crossed to the window. From 12 stories up, the river looked like a belt of tin. The city's low hum pressed faintly against the glass. In the reflection, the room stood behind her, empty. When she turned, someone sat in the chair by the window. A man dressed as if headed to a dinner that started decades ago, dark suit, pale shirt, a tie slightly loosened, as if he done the first thing you do when you return to a room and never did the second. He had the kind of face the world rewards, pleasant, forgettable. He watched Anita with the precise neutrality of someone checking a schedule. "I'm late," he said. His voice made no dust in the air. It landed and stayed. "For what?" Anita asked. "Check out." The word did something in the room, like a magnet brushed near iron filings. The lights hummed higher. The air cooled another half degree. "You've been here a while," Anita said. because sometimes a stupid sentence is a bridge. I fell, he said simply, and flicked 2 fingers toward the window without looking. They closed the room, but you can't close air, can you? It remembers. Why 1207? Because I asked for high and quiet. Because I signed the book. A small smile without humor. We all signed something. He stood. The chair creaked the way real chairs do in expensive hotels. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket and stared at his wrist, as if a watch might appear if he remembered hard enough. Anita did not step back when he stepped forward. He passed her like a cold shadow. He stopped by the desk phone and pressed the cradle down. The phone clicked with a satisfying old-world clack. The lobby payphone rang downstairs 3 times, patient and brisk, as if someone had asked for a bell. "Where do you go?" Anita asked, aware of how small the question was. The man looked at the door, and something in the hallway leaned closer as if to eavesdrop. He tilted his head down. The word carried weight. Not hell, not heaven, not metaphysical drama. Down, like laundry. Down, like the place where machines hum and nobody visits at night unless there's a problem. He crossed to the door and stopped with his hand on the knob. "Would you mind?" he said, and his politeness tightened her throat. "Checking me out?" Anita nodded, because clerks nod. She whispered, "Yes, because that's what helps things go where they need to." She imagined a ledger in front of her, a line that read room 1207, departed, 2:29 a.m. She said, "Thank you for your stay." The knob turned. The door opened to a hall that had grown quiet enough to hear the elevator cables sing. The man stepped through. He did not look back. The door swung gently shut. Anita stood in the room longer than she should have, listening. The hotel made the sounds old buildings make, metal contracting, air checking windows, the thin song of climate systems. She picked up the key and closed the door behind her carefully, the way you close a sleeping child's door. She rode the elevator down and did not look at herself in the mirror. On the way past the lobby payphone, she touched the receiver. Warm resolution in the morning. She told the manager the truth and watched it pass across their face, the way light passes across a building. No purchase, no heat. They checked the cameras. Nothing. They checked the guest book. The page for last night had a single entry, a number written in a hand that did not match Anita S. 1207. They kept the room sealed. They kept the payphone because, eventually, even fear becomes part of the. If you ask Anita why she stayed on nights after that, she'll tell you people arrive at weird hours for reasons they don't always share. And sometimes the best kindness is a smooth check-in and the knowledge that when they ready to leave, someone will meet their eye and say, "Thank you, you're all set." She set an extra key on the hook for 1207, its brass face blank. She never needed to use it, but it felt right, the way you set 2 plates when you live alone, just in case memory sits down with you and asks for water. Outro, lingering mystery, hospitals, highways, hotels, the places where night teaches you what buildings know. If you work in those hours, you learn new measures of silence. The good kind, that means rest. The bad kind, that means attention. The ancient kind, that means the present has stepped aside for a moment to let something older pass through. The people in these stories did what night workers do. They kept moving. They signed the log. They stood their post. They offered a word, a gesture, a rule followed kindly, and something in the dark recognized them. So, the next time you alone after midnight and the air grows specific, when a sink stops running without your hand, when a car appears at a pump with no driver, When a phone that isn't plugged in rings, remember, you re not the first to work those hours, and you won't be the last. Say hello, say thank you, say, I see you, then finish your round. Most of the time, that's all the night wants. Call to action. Have you ever worked a night shift and felt the building pay attention to you? Heard a cart that wasn't there? Saw a name in a log you didn't write? Or checked in a guest you never saw? Share your story in the comments. Sure whisper might be the one that helps someone make it through their next long night. And if you want more true style hauntings like these, subscribe and stay with us. The night is long, but we're here together.